Are we going to even recognize the Seahawks this season? Seattle easily leads the NFC West in change for 2025, and we're expecting that to include the offensive style. But should we be excited about the change, wary of it, or simply indifferent? I'll tell you one thing, our favorite draft target among Seahawks probably isn't the first guy you'd name. We're breaking down everything you need to know in Seattle and addressing the changes that do matter for the other three NFC West teams. An all-new Draft Sharks podcast starts right now. Matt Schauf and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here for the penultimate episode of our divisional preview series. It is the NFC West today, number 7 in the 8-part series. You can find every episode on the Draft Sharks YouTube channel, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or wherever you like to get your podcasts. And Jared, this division starts us off with the Arizona Cardinals. What did things look like last season for Arizona?
Yeah, the Cardinals took a step forward last year in their second season under OC Drew Petzing. The Cardinals last year, they finished 12th in points, 11th in yards, 7th in yards per play. All those marks were up from Petzing's first season in 2023. It was the running game that really fueled this offense, and that's been the case in both of Petzing's years so far. The running games have been really good. Last year, the Cardinals finished 11th in rush attempts, but they were 7th in yards, 3rd in the NFL in yards per carry as a team at 5.3. I think, speaking of the running game here, I think the run-pass split is interesting because for the season last year, the Cardinals finished 22nd in pass rate. They were 11th in neutral pass rate, though, and they took a big jump in pass rate after their Week 11 bye. In their 10 games before the bye, 50.5% pass rate on a 52% neutral pass rate. After that bye week, 61.3% pass, 62.7% neutral pass rate. Those marks would have ranked 6th and 2nd in the NFL. So I haven't heard this talked about much, but I do think it's interesting they made that jump. And, it obviously matters a lot as we look to project this team into 2020.
I can't help but wonder if this team is overrating how it fared on offense last season, because as we turn to what's new for 2025, it's absolutely nothing on offense. The Cardinals spent 6 of their 7 draft picks this spring on defense. The only offensive player was a round 6 offensive lineman named Hayden Connor. Otherwise, it's the same dudes back on offense. You mentioned the shift. They also ran Kyler Murray less than we've been used to previously. There's been a lot of chatter about how he's going to run more, about how they're planning to run him more. I just don't know how much I trust the coaching on this Arizona offense. And we'll get more into what that means for the individual players.
Yeah, I do, though, as we're looking to, project this team into 2025, I like the fact that there's so much continuity here. I think that's just a good thing for at least the existing pieces on this offense. I also like that they're returning all 5 of their starting offensive linemen, because this was a good offensive line last year. PFF had them 13th in run block grades and 4th in pass block grades. So yeah, they definitely probably could use another weapon or two, but I think, for the pieces we're interested in fantasy drafts, I think the continuity is a good thing.
Sure, it certainly makes it easier to project everybody, but I don't know that this offense is as good as it thinks it is. I think they seem to be relying pretty heavily on improvement from Kyler Murray, from Marvin Harrison Jr., and, obviously from others. But moving on to player targets now, easily the top target for me here is James Conner, and he hasn't actually been as big a target for me as he was the past couple years. Still a very good value, RB19 by our consensus ADP right now, going at the end of round 4. So I still like James Conner where he's going, but he doesn't stand out. I think he was going even later than that in drafts the past 2 years. So I'm landing him more than going after him at this point.
Yeah, I agree. This feels like his highest ADP in a while. So it'd be ironic if this is the year, the wheels finally fall off for James Conner, when it feels like everyone else is kind of finally buying back into him. But we still are ahead of ADP on Conner. We have him RB17. He was RB11 in PPR points per game last year through week 16 before he got hurt and missed the final couple games of the season. Was still super efficient among 47 running backs with 90 plus carries last year. 5th in PFF rushing grade, 13th in yards after contact per attempt, 18th in rush yards over expected per attempt. So no signs of decline for James Conner. And there was a really good press conference with Petzing recently where he was asked, is James Conner still your workhorse? And he said, absolutely. And he kind of went on to say that he, basically said Trey Benson's role is not going to expand. Didn't exactly say that, but that's kind of what he alluded to. So I think Conner, as long as he's healthy, is going to continue to produce as, at least a high end RB2, maybe even like a lower end RB1.
Now, Trey Benson, that what you just said about his role means that you should not draft Trey Benson expecting him to give you any fantasy value as long as James Conner's healthy. But Trey Benson certainly, I think, still attractive in that mid round 13 range where his ADP is sitting right now because running backs get hurt. James Conner has gotten hurt in the past. He stayed healthier last season than we've been used to with James Conner. If I don't have Conner on my roster, I'm interested in stashing Trey Benson on my bench. Not like a high level target, obviously, for me. We're talking about a backup running back, but I think there is significant upside to him. And I do think that he would lead the backfield if James Conner went down.
Yep, agreed. Good prospect. Again, a running game that's just been good under Petzing. So I think if Benson got a chance, he'd be productive. I think he is a pure handcuff. He's kind of priced that way. He's in there with all the rest of the handcuffs. So he's fine where he's priced. Like you said, Matt, hasn't been a primary target for me, but I'll definitely mix him in on some teams when I don't draft Conner.
I wouldn't call Michael Wilson a target, especially as we get more to lineup setting leagues. I don't think he's really going to matter for those. I do think where Michael Wilson's going, considering all of the lack of change on this Arizona offense, he looks underrated as a late round best ball target, especially if you do have Kyler Murray on your team.
Exactly. We have him wide receiver 92 in ADP, which is kind of crazy. I mean, this guy ran a route on 86% of the Cardinals pass plays last year. He's a full-time player. He's going to remain a full-time player. That fact alone makes him a really nice best ball pick if you're looking, in the last round or two, just for a guy who's probably going to give you like a handful of starter level weeks.
Now, Jared, I mentioned Michael Wilson there because I'm not excited about any Cardinals players. So I'll turn it over to you and you tell me if there are any Cardinals that you're targeting or if we're looking at fades here.
I have one more target, and that's Trey McBride. If you look at consensus ADP now, he is tight end 2, obviously, but he's 31st overall. So he's, going mid round 3. We have him 27th overall in our PPR rankings. So he's definitely a target for me if he's getting to that 2-3 turn or anywhere into round 3. Look at McBride last year, third among tight ends in PPR points per game, but he was first at the position in expected PPR points per game, first in target share, first in targets per route run, first in targets per game, first in catches per game, second in yards per game, tied for 24th among tight ends with just 2 receiving touchdowns. He is a big time positive regression candidate as far as those touchdowns go. He was second among tight ends last year in expected receiving touchdowns, led the position in red zone targets. The opportunity was there. He just didn't score the touchdowns. I expect that to change. If he does what he did last year and scores like 7 or 8 touchdowns, he's going to outscore Brock Bowers even.
Yeah, I have no problem with Trey McBride anywhere in round 3. It's still too early for him to be a target for me, but I think he's appropriately valued. I'm fine with taking him in round 3. We'll have another similar tight end that we'll talk about later in this show. Marvin Harrison Jr. is a player that I would have liked to have been able to target in drafts this year. I opened draft season hoping that he was going to go somewhere in the 20s, that people would, latch on to how he disappointed relative to expectation as a rookie, but that just hasn't been the case. He's early in round 4, wide receiver 18 in ADP. I don't think that's an unfair price, but it keeps him from being a target in year 2.
Yep, I agree. I expect a nice step forward for Marvin Harrison this season from what he did as a rookie, but that's priced in. I mean, he finished wide receiver 42 last year in PPR points per game. So he's going, more than 20 spots higher than that, 24 spots higher than that in ADP right now. So I just think that step forward is priced in. I don't know if he has much upside beyond his current price, because I'm not sure he's better than Trey McBride. I mean, Trey McBride last year, for starters, he had 31 more targets than Harrison in 1 fewer game. And he also easily beat Harrison in both PFF receiving grade and yards per route run. Again, I think Harrison's going to be better this year. He can close that gap on McBride, but I still think McBride's going to be at least a 1A in this passing game, and that's going to make it tough, I think, for Harrison to finish higher than a mid-range wide receiver.
And there is room for both Harrison and McBride to succeed fantasy wise here. There's plenty of targets available for those two guys because of what we talked about. I've mentioned Michael Wilson. We didn't even talk about any other Cardinals receivers because the rest of them don't matter. But part of the reason that I can't get excited about Marvin Harrison at his price, and I'm not necessarily targeting Trey McBride, is that Kyler Murray has just not been that good a passing quarterback. He's fine. Obviously, he's a well above average versus other humans, but when we compare him to other starting NFL quarterbacks, nothing special as a passer. The rushing has trended down. And that's why I'm not targeting Kyler Murray at all. I'm much closer to fading him. QB9 is an okay price at
Mhm.
the end of round 8. If you tell me that you like Kyler Murray, I'm not going to fight you to bring him down, but I think he's just kind of in an appropriate range, and I don't
Yeah.
believe that he has the top 6 upside that he used to.
Yeah, I'm with you. He's Kyler's not really a target or a fade for me. I will take him certainly on best ball teams when I have Trey McBride or, less likely Marvin Harrison, but I'll definitely take him as a stacking partner. We have Kyler ranked quarterback 10, but he's also 1 3D value point behind quarterback 7. That's a really tight range there. So again, quarterback 9 I think is right for Kyler. He's finished quarterback 12 and quarterback 13 in points per game in these last 2 seasons under Drew Petzing. Like you said, Matt, the rushing has been declining. Not what we want to see. I mean, that's kind of what fuels Kyler Murray's fantasy value. He's not going to be an elite passer. He needs that rushing. I do think there are some reasons for optimism heading into this season. I do think he's a positive TD regression candidate. We talked about it with Trey McBride. That obviously kind of funnels through to Kyler Murray. Last year, Kyler was 7th among quarterbacks in expected passing touchdowns with 28.3, tied for 13th with just 21 actual touchdowns. So he threw, 7 fewer touchdowns than expected. Again, I think there's some upside if you think the Cardinals are going to lean further towards the pass like they did over the final few games of last season. And then I think if Marvin Harrison does take that step forward, that obviously helps Kyler Murray too. So I think it would not surprise me if he's, finishes quarterback 6 or quarterback 7 by the end of the year. But I think where he's priced, quarterback 9, quarterback 10 is most likely where he's going to finish this season.
He also hasn't been very good at throwing touchdown passes in his career. Career touchdown rate of 4.1%, 4 of his 6 seasons under 4% in that category. So maybe there's some regression there, but I'm not betting on a truly positive season throwing touchdown passes for Kyler Murray. And just to give a little bit more context for where he's at in ADP, a round and a half behind Bo Nix, another guy that I'm not targeting, but also ahead of Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, Brock Purdy, Caleb Williams. We've talked about some quarterbacks that are behind that group that I think have the upside to finish, right with or even ahead of Kyler Murray.
Yep, totally agree. That's a big tier of quarterbacks, and Kyler is, still near the top of it in terms of ADP.
By the way, I also recently did a shark bite about him saying that his knee is better than it's been the past 2 years. But in that same report, in that same set of quotes, he also said his knee is never going to be back to what it was before the injury. So I wasn't sure whether to take that as Kyler Murray's going to look better than last year, or Kyler Murray is never going to look like he did at the beginning of his career. So that keeps me in that unexcited range on the Arizona quarterback. Los Angeles Rams up next, Jared. What did 2024 look like for that squad?
Yeah, this was an average offense last year. The Rams finished 20th in points, 15th in yards, 16th in yards per play. It was actually their worst season as an offense under Sean McVay, other than 2022 when Matt Stafford missed 8 games. And the running game was the biggest problem for the Rams last year. They finished 31st in the league in yards per attempt as a team. They were 14th in yards per pass attempt. So the passing game was much more efficient than the running game. They were a neutral offense in terms of both pace and run pass split. They were 20th in the NFL in total plays, 17th in pace, 15th in pass rate. That's kind of what they've been under Sean McVay. They've generally been, neutral to even a run leaning offense. And they've also remained run heavy, I'd say, inside the red zone. Last year, they were 24th in the NFL in red zone pass rate. That, of course, is a big reason why Kyren Williams has scored so many touchdowns.
Now, they made a very significant change, actually 2 changes rolled into one on that offense to try to spur some improvement. And it's not in the run game. It was bringing in Davante Adams at basically the same time as they were dumping Cooper Kupp. And it's interesting to me in that they got rid of Cooper Kupp, who certainly looks like he is washed at this point. The guy that they signed to replace him is actually 6 months older than Cooper Kupp. That speaks to how Davante Adams played last year. I think that he will get plenty of targets. I think he will continue to be a good receiver. He's in a good spot, I think, for that production to continue. Other minor changes on the offense, then we can get back to Davante Adams and the other guys. The Rams drafted tight end Terrence Ferguson in round 2. They're also getting Tyler Higbee back after he missed basically all of last year, coming off the previous year's very end of the season ACL tear. So that's 2 tight ends back in the mix that were not around for last year's offense. Jarquez Hunter arrived in round 4 to a backfield that who we'll talk about in a few minutes. That, of course, follows Blake Corum joining the team in round 3 the year before. And the Rams welcomed back center Coleman Shelton. He actually spent his first 5 years with LA, then 2024 with the Bears on just a 1-year, $3 million deal. The Rams let him walk after drafting Bo Limmer, or let him walk and drafted Bo Limmer in round 6 in 2024. Started Limmer last season, apparently decided that he wasn't good enough because they now brought Shelton back on a 2-year, $12 million contract. So he's back to starting at center. Otherwise, the group looks the same.
Yeah, I'm worried about the offensive line, though. They lost tackle Joseph Noteboom and Jonah Jackson this offseason. Both those guys played just 4 games last year, but they had been starters for this offensive line. And they also have their other tackle, Alaric Jackson, dealing with this blood clot issue that, like, kind of no one knows when he's going to be ready to play. He might not be ready for the start of the season. He might miss a lot of the season. So it's a very unsettled offensive line that I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on over the next month.
Player targets, Jared. Let's start at the top because Puka Nacua, even though he's in round 1, I know has been a target for me through lots of best ball season. What do you think of him?
Yep, I'm definitely in on Puka. We have him 7th overall. He's 8th overall in ADP, so we're a spot ahead of consensus. I've been taking him a lot as well. The guy has just been a monster. You look at his 9 full games. He only played 9 full games last year. He missed a lot of time. He left 2 games early, but in those 9 full games, 10.9 targets per game on a 36% target share. 8.2 catches, 105 yards per game. He was wide receiver 3 in expected points per game over that span, wide receiver 2 in actual points per game. I view Davante Adams as an upgrade over Cooper Kupp and probably takes some target share from Puka Nacua, but he can fall quite a bit from a 36% target share and still see plenty of targets to deliver on his current price tag.
Yeah, it's worth noting, too, that even Puka Nacua's full games last year weren't quite as full playing time-wise as the season before. He, of course, brought a knee injury into the season that wound up costing him about a month early in the year. I don't know that he was ever quite at full strength versus his first season. So I agree with you. Davante Adams, of course, takes some of that target share, but 30% is still like a top of the position, top of the league number. And I expect Puka Nacua to be in that range and give us big numbers. Nobody else is as much of a target, I think. Davante Adams, I think, is appropriately priced late in round 3, wide receiver 14 by our consensus ADP, wide receiver 15 in best ball ADP on Underdog. So I think that's a little too early to make him a true value, but I'm fine with Adams in that range.
Yeah, I've taken quite a bit of Adams. I would say, Mike Evans is the guy that we have ranked ahead of Davante Adams that goes like a half a round to a round later. So that's always my hang up with Adams is like, do I want to take Adams here or wait around and get Mike Evans? But Davante Adams, still very good. Last year, 29th in PFF receiving grade, 27th in yards per route among 84 qualifying wideouts. So not elite stuff where he was for most of his career, but still a very good wide receiver. And to me, besides playing with Aaron Rodgers, which is, I think, obviously the best spot for Davante Adams, this Rams landing spot is pretty nice. I mean, he's going to be the clear number 2 wide receiver in a concentrated offense. Matthew Stafford has a long history of getting big numbers out of multiple wide receivers, and I think that's going to be the case here. I think you're going to see Puka Nacua and Davante Adams combined for well over half of this team's targets.
Yeah, and it's worth remembering, too, that a lot of those years where it was Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods leading the way, they also had a third guy, Sammy Watkins, Brandon Cooks, in multiple years. So some of that target share figures to be more condensed to the top 2 rather than spread out over the top 3 like it has been for some of those previous Sean McVay teams. We'll talk about maybe a quarterback issue that we need to worry about in a minute. But first, Kyren Williams, I think, is a player that you and I are going to differ on a little bit. If you look at our consensus ADP right now, he sits late in round 2, RB11. I don't believe that. He has been in round 3 for most, if not all, of best ball season. And I expect that that's really going to be closer to Kyren Williams' true ADP. End of round 3 on Underdog right now, RB14. I think Kyren Williams is a guy worth targeting in that range.
Yeah, so I've actually taken Kyren a decent amount in like the late round 3, especially on Underdog. I think half PPR he gains quite a bit of value. We have him RB14 in PPR. I don't have our half PPR ranks pulled up in front of me, but he's going to be higher in half PPR. So that's the better format to take him in. My thing are Kyren, and I'm definitely open to moving him up as we get through August here, the more we learn about the Rams' plans in their backfield. But to me, I mean, he's reliant on volume, which has been awesome lately. You look at last year through week 17, RB4 in expected PPR points per game, 19.8 carries per game. He also has that massive role near the end zone. He was first among running backs in red zone carries last year, third in carries inside the 5-yard line. but the efficiency has been just okay. Again, RB4 in expected points per game last year, RB9 in actual points per game. He was kind of middling in all the efficiency stuff we look at. Plus, the passing game role has always been just okay, right? He's not going to put up big numbers in the passing game. So my concern with Kyren is if he does lose even 20 to 25% of the rushing work he had last year, he would lose quite a bit of fantasy value. And we've heard both GM Les Snead and head coach Sean McVay this offseason make some comments suggesting that they might want to go with more of a committee backfield than they have in the past. Sean McVay's history is workhorse back. So that's what makes this tough. They've kind of made comments about wanting to work in some other guys, but McVay has been a workhorse guy. And if that's the case, Kyren will beat his price tag. I'm just not sure he's going to get the same usage he did last year.
I would be absolutely shocked if Kyren Williams loses 20+% of his rushing work from last year, because like you said, history tells us that Sean McVay likes a primary back when he has that guy. And at the same time that they have made subtle hints at using more of a committee, he has also said, I hope we get Kyren Williams' contract done. I want him to know that he's a big part of what we want to do going forward. So I'm going to roll with that, plus the history of his usage, and stick with Kyren Williams late in round 3. If he doesn't work out for me from there, I'm okay with taking a hit on, betting that a player who was one of the league's top workhorses the previous 2 years just suddenly loses work to guys that didn't show that they were about to really take it away. Beyond what we've seen Kyren Williams do, let's look at some of the other early-ish round rookie running backs under Sean McVay. He's had Darrell Henderson in round 3, Cam Akers in round 2. Kyren Williams wasn't even early. He was round 5. And then Blake Corum last year. Among those 4 guys, Cam Akers was the only one that had a significant role in his rookie season. And again, he was the second round pick of the group. So that tells us that the team really viewed him as a good player. Even he was splitting work with Malcolm Brown in that season. Of course, Cam Akers went down in week 2, so he got kind of a broken look at what they wanted him to be. He was a late season workhorse, but he is an outlier among those other rookie running backs. Kyren Williams himself barely played in his rookie season and then turned into a workhorse in 2023 when we expected him to, at most, split with Cam Akers and probably work behind Cam Akers that season. So I think the pattern is they bring in insurance, but they roll with the guy who's getting it done.
Well, they don't just have the rookie Jarquez Hunter. They also have Blake Corum, who they took 2 years ago. And I think that's an interesting seg here because, the market has Jarquez Hunter slightly ahead of Corum and ADP. We have Corum slightly ahead of Hunter. And for me, it's because of that reason. I think, like you said, Matt, McVay has this pattern of drafting a rookie running back, but not playing him that much in that first year. So I think, and we'll see how this shakes out. So, and I've been taking shots on both Hunter and Corum, as that handcuff behind Kyren, but I think there's a chance that, and even though I like Hunter better as a prospect than Corum, I think Corum might get the first crack at that number 2 running back job. Definitely still a fluid situation though, that we're going to, be keeping an eye on in camp and preseason action.
I think Hunter sitting 2 full rounds ahead of Blake Corum in consensus ADP right now is a great example of how we, the general fantasy market, overrate what teams are telling us with draft picks. When they take Jarquez Hunter in round 4, we assume that they're saying, oh, Blake Corum is not what we wanted last year. That might be what they're telling us, but we also don't know that that's what they're telling us. It also might be that they just need more insurance in the backfield because it was thin behind Corum, behind Kyren Williams last year. And we don't have to look back that far to when they had to bring Royce Freeman and Darrell Henderson off the street to just fill out the backfield after injuries took down Kyren Williams and others. So I think it's an insurance pick to grab Jarquez Hunter. Maybe he's better than Blake Corum right away, but the market's way too sure that that's the case. So I'm far more interested in Corum. I think there's a better chance that he would be the more direct replacement for Kyren Williams should the starter go down.
Yeah, Corum in redraft, I do really like Jarquez Hunter in Dynasty, though. He's a prospect I really liked. And, like we've said, Kyren Williams is unsigned. He could be gone after this year.
Yeah, I can't say that I'm all that interested in either guy for Dynasty, but we'll see what happens beyond this season. Matthew Stafford could be a value for Superflex formats, but he's currently not practicing because of a back issue, and the Rams are not telling us a whole lot about it. It seems like Sean McVay is trying to downplay it. He says there's a return plan in place, but he also said that he's not going to tell us the details because if that changes, he doesn't want to have to explain to reporters why it's changing. So we've seen this kind of stuff with Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay before. I'm a little wary of this situation.
Yeah, me too. And I think, that funnels down to the wide receivers too. I mean, to me, if there's an argument against Puka Nacua and Davante Adams, it probably is this Matthew Stafford injury. They do have Jimmy Garoppolo as a backup, who he's definitely an above average backup. I think the offense would be fine with him, but it would be a downgrade if Stafford misses time. So, I actually have more Stafford than I wish I did in best ball, just because I've drafted Puka so much, and I even have a pretty good amount of Davante Adams. And like, when you draft those guys, Stafford's such an easy stacking partner because he has been going so cheap, and he's only getting cheaper now. But as a standalone fantasy quarterback, he's definitely a fade for me. He's quarterback 22 in ADP, so he's cheap. But we have him quarterback 24. He finished quarterback 28 in points per game last year, and even beyond the injury stuff, his accuracy has been declining for a while now. His on-target pass percentage has declined every season since 2020. Last year's mark ranked 23rd among 34 qualifying quarterbacks. So he's definitely getting to the point where you got to worry how much gas is left in the tank.
Yeah, just forgettable, I think, as a fantasy asset in one quarterback leagues this year. And I do think that we should, and speaking of myself, I should probably consider the Stafford aspect a bit more in how much I want to draft Puka Nacua and certainly Davante Adams. Not really anybody else that I'm interested in on this team. I think if you're drafting best ball teams, Higbee and Terrence Ferguson both look interesting as late best ball tight end threes.
Yeah, I think it even has to be FFPC tight end premium for me. I haven't drafted Higbee or Ferguson in these, underdog or drafters.
San Francisco 49ers, Jared, give us the 2024 recap, which was not what they were used to.
No, it was still a good offense, though, despite all these injuries they dealt with, which we can get into. But the Niners still last year, 4th in yards and 4th in yards per play. They were just 13th in points. So that kind of tells you they kind of underperformed as far as scoring versus, how many yards and yards per play they were putting up. They were 14th in the NFL in red zone TD rate. So they were kind of middling in terms of, converting these drives into touchdowns when they got into the red zone. But it was a very impressive season considering all the injuries they had. Christian McCaffrey misses basically the entire season. Brandon Aiyuk misses 2/3 of the season. Deebo Samuel has that stint with pneumonia. Ricky Pearsall gets shot like just before the season starts. Their left tackle, Trent Williams, missed 7 games. So impressive to me, both for Kyle Shanahan and Brock Purdy to, be able to keep this offense as strong as it was despite all those injuries.
And no significant changes to the offensive coaching staff looking at this year from last year. They did promote Clay Kubiak for the second straight season. He was the assistant quarterbacks coach a couple years ago, 2022 and 2023. Last year, Kubiak served as the pass game specialist. This year, he's officially the offensive coordinator. I think we all know Kyle Shanahan is primarily in charge of the game plans here. So we'll see how much that matters, other than trying to advance Clay Kubiak's career, most likely. Deebo Samuel, of course, is gone from this 49ers team. Brandon Aiyuk is coming off an ACL tear. So we're still watching for signals on exactly when and how much he's going to play, but that combo of factors leaves more room for Jawan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall. We'll talk about them in a few minutes. Christian McCaffrey, his return to health might be the biggest change for this San Francisco team. He barely played last year, appeared in 4 games officially, was never true Christian McCaffrey, off issues with both of his calves. So that's going to be a primary story for all of fantasy this year, not just San Francisco. And then up front, the 49ers watched Aaron Banks, the guard, leave for Green Bay. After starting nearly all of the past 3 seasons, they are replacing that spot in-house.
Also traded Jordan Mason to Minnesota, of course. They draft Jordan James, and I believe it was round 4. He was a day 3 pick. So you have Isaac Guerendo still there backing up McCaffrey, but I think Jordan James is at least worth monitoring. Beyond Jordan Mason's departure, Deebo Samuel, he leaves behind 5.4 targets per game, also 2.8 carries per game last year, which I think is worth keeping in mind. Like, there is room for Christian McCaffrey to play such a massive role. And we'll get into him, but I mean, with all these departures and injuries, and like McCaffrey could be such a focal point of this offense, as he tends to be when he's healthy.
Yeah, and that's why I think we should start player targets with Christian McCaffrey, who opened draft season going just inside of round 2, which is a great reason to make sure that you spread your drafting out if you are a best ball and or high volume drafter, because that has shifted further into round 1 as we've gotten further into draft season. He's now number 7 overall in ADP, RB4. You will still find wide gaps on how people are looking at McCaffrey. You've got some that are saying, I'm going to draft him. You've got some that are saying, I am completely hands off. I'm on the draft him side. I mean, obviously, the fewer teams that you're drafting, the more risk there is to taking him. But I don't know that there's more risk to him right now than there was either of the past 2 seasons, unless we get some inkling that these calf issues come back up. He's been either hurt or not hurt. He hasn't been the kind of guy that's questionable in season that we're worried about holding up. It's either an injury strikes him or he's dominating the workload. And I would rather bet on the dominating the workload version unless he gives us some specific injury to worry about this year.
Yeah, McCaffrey has been a full go all offseason. He was a full go in the spring. He's been a full go in training camp. Glowing reports from the 49ers coaches and in the media there, all the beat writers saying McCaffrey looks awesome. If he stays healthy, he'd be my bet to lead running backs in points per game. Go back to 2023. McCaffrey averaged 24.7 PPR points per game. That's 2.7 more than Saquon Barkley averaged last year. And we know what a massive season Saquon Barkley had. McCaffrey was that much better than him just 2 years ago. And even last year in his 3 full games, he got basically the same workload as he got in 2023. He played 88% of the snaps in his 3 full games, 14.3 carries, 5.3 targets per game. And again, they trade Jordan Mason away. They only add a day 3 rookie. Like I think they're just ready to, again, load up McCaffrey for as long as he's healthy this season.
And the Deebo Samuel departure, it frees up short range targets, it frees up carries, and those are not necessarily going to go to other wide receivers. So Christian McCaffrey, obviously there is downside risk. The upside is dominating the position and being the most valuable player in all of fantasy. So if you want to not touch him at all because of last year's issues, that's fine. That's up to you. But I learned a couple years ago that if you disregard Christian McCaffrey just because of the first round price tag, then it could strongly damage your overall fantasy results. Next up among 49ers is George Kittle, who's going tight end 3, mid to late round 4. To me, Jared, he's very similar to Trey McBride in that I think he's appropriately valued. I think it's a little bit too early to call him a true target, but I'm totally fine with where he's going because Kittle might be the only other guy that I think has a shot to lead these tight ends in scoring this year.
Yeah, for sure. I like round 4 George Kittle. He's crept into round 3 in these best ball tournaments, and that's where to me it starts to get a bit iffy. But in round 4, I like him quite a bit. We do have him a couple spots higher than his overall ADP. We're at 42nd overall. Kittle led all tight ends in PPR points per game last year. It was not Brock Bowers. It was not Trey McBride. It was George Kittle. Also led all tight ends with 2.66 yards per route run. That was his best mark since 2020. So no signs of decline from George Kittle, despite the fact that he's getting up there in age now. And to me, the Deebo Samuel departure is also excellent news for George Kittle. We've seen Kittle have some pretty significant splits with and without Deebo Samuel. Look at George Kittle's last 6 full games without Deebo Samuel. 5 catches, 78 yards. 9 catches, 149 yards, 3 catches, 39 yards and a touchdown, 6 for 120 and 2 touchdowns, 4 for 23 yards and a touchdown, 4 for 29 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's been a monster without Deebo Samuel. Also, we have Brandon Aiyuk, who's going to miss likely the start of the season, if not, the first half of the season. I think Kittle has a chance to, again, lead all tight ends in PPR points per game. I wouldn't bet on it, but I think he has a chance with McBride and Bowers.
And a pretty solid chance to lead these 49ers in targets overall. The wide receivers are all going at a value range where I'm not sure I necessarily have a favorite, but I think they're all going at a level where I think getting a 49ers receiver is probably a pretty good idea. It starts with Juwan Jennings in ADP, top around 8 by our consensus numbers, leading 49ers wide receivers in that ADP, but only wide receiver 39 overall. So even if you question Juwan Jennings, as I do, just on a talent standpoint and on a full history standpoint, looking beyond last season, that's still a level where you're not betting a whole lot if you do take him.
Yeah, exactly. Jennings is a weird one. The massive 4th-year breakout. We don't see that very often. But like he was impressive last year, even beyond just the raw production. If you look at the 104 wide receivers with 40-plus targets last year, Jennings was 9th among those 104 in targets per route, 14th in yards per route, and then he was 15th in PFF receiving grade and 10th in ESPN receiver score. So, drawing volume, being efficient on that volume, and then these, grading systems we look at. Jennings was awesome in all of those things. And then, how much downside does he really have? Because, again, Deebo's gone. Aiyuk is going to miss the start of the season. And when he does come back, I doubt he's Brandon Aiyuk right away. So like Jennings is gonna be basically a full-time player in this passing game that's always efficient. So I just don't think he has much downside from his current ADP.
Yeah, if he were like wide receiver 30 or higher, then I'd be like, I don't know about Juwan Jennings. But like you said, ADP makes him an all upside bet, really, because even if your wide receiver 39 doesn't deliver for you, that's not killing your season. I do prefer Ricky Pearsall at wide receiver 46, going mid round 9 in ADP. But again, 7 wide receivers away from Jennings in positional ADP. Has struggled with the hamstring for the second straight summer. I mean, obviously the gunshot thing, it was the big news, and that's behind him at this point. The hamstring issue is a bit worrisome because that's the kind of thing that can plague a player and just kind of recur season to season. But again, price tag on Pearsall, wide receiver 46. I can draft him as a reserve and see what happens. And the comparison between him and Jennings, one is a first round pick just last year by the 49ers to a team that did not have a wide receiver need at that point. They still had Deebo Samuel, even though, maybe they were planning to part with Deebo as soon as this past offseason. They had a healthy Brandon Aiyuk. So they obviously liked Ricky Pearsall. And as soon as he did get on the field last year, he did get significant playing time. We saw production late in the season. So I think he's a better prospect than Juwan Jennings, who was also forgettable in college, was a 7th round pick or maybe undrafted, I forget at the moment, and then took a while to do anything for the 49ers. So I think Juwan Jennings in general is a player type that we should be wary of if he's going at an earlier price than he is. Comparing him to Pearsall, I like Pearsall better, but I think they're both going in fine ranges to be targets.
Yep, I'm in on Pearsall at cost. He is a tricky one for me because I didn't love him as a prospect. And then he, despite, like you said, Matt, him getting the playing time once he got healthy last year, he did nothing for his first 9 games. 3.1 targets per game, 1.9 catches, 21 receiving yards. He drew a target on just 12% of his routes over his first 9 games. The last 2 games, big ones, 8 catches, 141 yards and a touchdown, 6 catches, 69 yards and a touchdown, drew a target on 21% of his routes in those 2 games. The Niners were eliminated by that point, so it almost felt like they were just trying to get Pearsall going in those 2 games. So I think that's worth keeping in mind. And of course, it's also worth keeping in mind that the guy got shot like just prior to week 1 last year. That obviously affected his rookie season. So kind of I think an incomplete grade for Pearsall based on the rookie season. But again, same thing with Jennings. Like he's gonna be basically a full-time player in this offense right away. Even when Aiyuk comes back, I think Pearsall is going to remain heavily involved. So just not a ton of risk at his ADP.
And I think everybody in San Francisco just gets an outlook boost from being with Kyle Shanahan. It's like, yeah, that might be a prospect that I didn't love, but if Kyle Shanahan loves him, then I'm going to go ahead and give him some Kyle Shanahan boost as long as they're not getting out of hand. Brandon Ayuk's the other guy, obviously, that we've referred to a few times. He's going late round 10, wide receiver 51. Whereas both Pearsall and Juwan Jennings pop as positive values on our ADP Market Index page, it looks there like Brandon Aiyuk is a negative value, and he is. But the thing here is that his upside, his, the case for Brandon Aiyuk this year defies projection or ranking. Like, we're not projecting him for good full season numbers. You should assume that Brandon Aiyuk is going to start the season slowly, whether he's on the field or off it. The reason to go ahead and draft him in that range where he's going is the chance that over the second half of the season, he's something close to what he has been previously, which is a former first-round pick, probably the lead receiver as soon as he is back to full health for these 49ers now, and with a shot at being more of a lead receiver than he was before Deebo Samuel left town. So I'm not saying that you need to take Brandon Aiyuk because this might just be a season that's limited throughout. Yeah. But at the range where he's going, he's certainly worth strongly considering.
Yeah, he's cheap enough where he's in the mix for me. I've kind of gone back and forth on Aiyuk too, because there was a positive report like a few weeks ago, but then we've had some more negative reports lately on it. I mean, that was a bad injury. He suffered torn ACL, MCL, and meniscus damage. He had surgery in mid-November of last year, so it was an injury that happened later in the season. So I think, like you said, Matt, second half of the season asset is, I think, the best case scenario for Aiyuk. I think he could return a bit before that, but I don't think you're going to use him in fantasy lineups his first game or 2 back. So I think second half of the season is kind of best case. He's probably not going to be at 100%, but again, in this efficient offense with enough snaps, like he could be useful over the second half. I like him better in lineup setting leagues because in best ball, I hate taking all those zeros. You have a deep enough bench, just, plan on just not using him for the first 6 to 8 weeks of the year, and then hopefully over the second half of the year he can help you.
The fit, I think, is also different depending on what else you have drafted at wide receiver. Like if you already drafted 3 guys that you know you're going to start whenever they're healthy, it's a lot easier to just stick a guy on your bench that might give you nothing all season and just wait on that second half of the season upside. I think that's true for either lineup setting or best ball. You don't want to put Aiyuk necessarily on a roster with a bunch of other high risk or likely slow starting wide receivers, but he fits better with a stronger wide receiver core. Probably the 49ers player that I am fading the most is Isaac Guerendo. And the biggest thing is I think that the draft market is way too certain that it is Isaac Guerendo as the RB2 over Jordan James, who you mentioned earlier in the change section. So we've got Isaac Guerendo going mid-round 12. That puts him ahead of, at running back, Jerome Ford, Trey Benson, Ray Davis, Tyler Algier. So first off, I'm totally fine taking all of those guys over Isaac Guerendo because I don't think Guerendo is going to do anything unless Christian McCaffrey goes down. Obviously, that's the same boat that those other players are in. He's also going ahead of at wide receiver, Rashid Shaheed, Hollywood Brown, Jaden Higgins. So not only are you choosing Guerendo over these other guys that I think are safer bets to be their team's number 2 running backs, you're also taking him over some upside at wide receiver. Jordan James, meanwhile, his ADP is basically undrafted, especially looking at the consensus numbers. These guys arrived at pretty much the same level NFL draft wise. James went 147th overall this year. Guerendo went 129th overall last season. And Guerendo, even though he was a 3rd-round pick by the 49ers, that was coming off a lackluster college career. He never led any of his college backfields. He did not exceed 64 carries in a season until his 6th year of college at Louisville. And even then, he trailed Jawar Jordan in work and production. And maybe you've heard of Jawar Jordan. He got drafted or signed as an undrafted free agent with Houston last season. Didn't even make that roster on a team that did not have a very good backfield behind Joe Mixon. He, of course, Guerendo, gave us that elite combine testing that I think dramatically changed his view as a prospect. But I think history altogether tells us that he's maybe a solid to good football player, but also maybe not that good a football player. And it's going to come down to exactly what the 49ers think of him and what they tell us about him heading into the season.
Yeah, I'm also fading Guerendo, which is super scary because I think if he is the handcuff and if McCaffrey does miss time in this 49ers running game with the type of, size and speed Guerendo, and Guerendo did look good in the chances he got last year, once when McCaffrey was hurt and Jordan Mason also went down, Guerendo looked good. I think he's definitely the favorite for the job, but I'm with you, Matt. I don't think he's locked in. If we get confirmation like later in August that Guerendo is the number 2, I think his price tag will make more sense. But for now, there's just enough risk on him that I'm not taking him, even though he's a scary fade because like he could be a league winner. If McCaffrey misses a bunch of time again, Guerendo could be a league winner.
I don't think so, because I don't think he's going to be a backfield dominator if McCaffrey goes down. I think both of these guys will factor in. I think last year they didn't have enough running backs for him not to be the backfield leader. I just think that odds are against a guy who couldn't lead a college backfield, leading a 49ers backfield if they have other options. And you might say, yeah, they have Patrick Taylor. Patrick Taylor's been a limited player. He's showed us that across multiple teams. And I mentioned so much about Guerendo's college run. At the same time, Jordan James was forcing his way onto a field that was led by Bucky Irving at Oregon and then did have a dominant final season, dominant meaning backfield work, final season at Oregon. So I just think we're talking about a better prospect here. I think they'll both factor into a backfield that loses Christian McCaffrey.
Definitely a situation to keep a close eye on in camp here because the Christian McCaffrey handcuff definitely meant.
Mm-hmm. Seattle Seahawks, our last team in this division. Jared, how did 2024 go before they blew it up?
Yeah, they blew it up because they passed too much, which I think is the big takeaway here. The Seahawks were a middling offense last year. They were 18th in points, 14th in both yards and yards per play, but they were 5th in pass rate, 3rd in neutral pass rate, 6th in pass rate over expected. They passed way too much for defensive-minded head coach Mike Macdonald's liking, and that's why they fired OC Ryan Grubb, which brings us to what's new in 2025.
Yeah, and that is what's new. OC Ryan Grubb gone after just 1 year. I'm not sure if Mike Macdonald just didn't know what he was going to get from Ryan Grubb or wanted to see how it worked and then wasn't pleased with the results, because Ryan Grubb came from that Washington offense, University of Washington offense, with Michael Penix and the big-time receivers as a pass-leaning OC. So it told us that Seattle probably wanted to do that Whatever the case, it's not going to be the way this year because they canned Ryan Grubb. He's back in college. Clint Kubiak arrives to replace him as OC. Spent last year as the Saints OC. Before that was the 49ers passing game coordinator in 2023, Broncos QB's coach and passing game coordinator in 2022, Vikings OC in 2021. That offense, 14th in scoring in the league, 12th in total yards with Kirk Cousins as the full season quarterback, fairly balanced in its approach. So the history here doesn't scream, run heavy, but
Yep.
coming from that Kubiak family, there's certainly plenty of running back success, rushing success behind them. And the Seahawks have told us that they're going to run the ball more this year. So we'll get more into that in a minute. But the other changes on the front, because that was far from the only thing in Seattle, Geno Smith, the quarterback, is out. Gone to Vegas. Sam Darnold is in on a multi-year deal. Seattle also drafted Jalen Milroe in round 3, but he's a total project. I know dynasty folks want Jalen Milroe to hit the field very soon. It seems like that would be not a great bet. We'll see if he's even the direct backup to Sam Darnold this season. The Seahawks traded DK Metcalf to the Steelers rather than pay him big money. They released Tyler Lockett. They then drafted Gray Zabel, the offensive lineman, in round 1 to start at guard. Drafted Elijah Arroyo in round 2 just so I can annoy Jared by saying his name. Later released Noah Fant. So changing up the tight end position as well. And we'll see exactly how Arroyo fits into things and how early he can get targets.
Yeah, I think this passing game is undoubtedly worse heading into this season than it was last year. I think Geno Smith to Sam Darnold is a downgrade. I don't want to take credit away from Darnold for the nice season he had last year, but it did come with Kevin O'Connell with awesome weapons in Minnesota. I think the task is just going to be much tougher in Seattle. Geno Smith did beat Darnold last year in adjusted completion rate over expected, PFF passing grade. So I think that's at least a slight downgrade. And then, losing DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, replacing them with Cooper Kupp and Marquez Valdes-Scantling, I guess. I think that's a pretty obvious downgrade too. So again, that just feeds into the idea that the Seahawks offense wants to lean much more on the run this season.
And I think we've got to start the player targets for that reason with Kenneth Walker, because in addition to talking about how much they want to run the ball, these Seattle coaches are talking up Kenneth Walker this offseason. Mid-round 4 in ADP, good value by our ADP market index. Not just a good value, but he is the biggest RB value to his point on our market index page. If you scroll down it, nobody ahead of him has a better positive rating. He just edges Alvin Kamara in that category. And frankly, if you want to start your draft, wide receiver, then take Alvin Kamara, then take Kenneth Walker, I think you're probably going to be off to a pretty good start in your PPR league. Like I said, Clint Kubiak has been talking up both the running and the receiving for Kenneth Walker this offseason, and that vow by the team to run plenty certainly supports a guy that they say is a terrific runner. And I think his performance when healthy backs that up.
Yeah, for sure. And the Seahawks are switching to this, zone blocking scheme under Kubiak that the Kubiak family is famous for. And Walker's numbers in the NFL so far haven't been good in that scheme. You just think about the type of player he is. I think he fits that scheme. He is that player, that runner who, looks for the big play. I think that's what you can get from this zone scheme. So it does seem like a good fit. Love that they're talking up his ability in the passing game, because that was a big part of Kenneth Walker's strong fantasy season last year. He finished RB12 last year in PPR points per game. A lot of that was because he got a 13.2% target share. When they made this coaching change, I wasn't sure if Walker was going to, maintain that type of role in the passing game, but it sure sounds like he has a chance to. And like you said, Matt, he's just been a really good runner. Third among 47 running backs last year in PFF rushing grade. And he's one of just 3 running backs with an 85 plus PFF rush grade in each of the last 2 years. The other 2 are Derrick Henry and James Conner. So, 2 of the guys from this division that we're definitely in on have topped an 85 PFF rushing grade. Concerns with Walker for me are, for starters, the durability. He's missed 10 games through 3 seasons, but I try not to worry about that too much. Running backs are just going to get hurt. That's part of the game. The offensive line is a concern for me as well. It was not a good unit last year. They did spend the round 1 pick on Gray Zabel, but there's a lot of other question marks down the O-line. So that's something that could hold Walker and the offense back. But I think he's so good, and it sounds like he's going to get so many touches. He's definitely someone I want to be in on.
I agree that the big concern with Kenneth Walker is that durability. That's just easy to plan against. I mean, make sure that you draft insurance, whether that is getting a third running back earlier than you typically would because you want to get somebody that can be a weekly option if Walker goes down. Do that. if you want to just take Zach Charbonnet, you're going to have to pay up a little bit to get Zach Charbonnet, and we'll talk about his ADP in a moment. But he makes sense if you already have Kenneth Walker, because we've already seen over the past 2 years, if Walker misses, then Charbonnet is a startable fantasy asset, and I don't see why that would change for this Seattle team. Kenneth Walker, for me, Jared, is the only guy that I'm actually interested in
Yep.
among Seahawks in drafts. I want to start the fade section with just a slight fade on JSN. We've addressed it previously. Jackson Smith and Jigba going late in round 3, wide receiver 15. I think that's an okay price. It's a little bit ahead of where we have him projected, but I think it's also understandably ahead. And I think there's a chance that he just dominates this team target wise, along the lines of what we talked about with Puka Nacua this season, and ends up being fine to even finishing just above that ADP.
Yeah, I do think he's going to need to dominate targets to meet his asking price or beat it, like, 26, 27% of the targets, which is definitely possible. It would be a big leap from even where he was last year. To me, there's so many unknowns with this Seattle offense. Again, we do feel very comfortable saying they're going to run quite a bit more under this new coaching staff. And then, again, Sam Darnold's a question for me. I think there's a chance he sort of, turns back into Jets Sam Darnold without Kevin O'Connell behind a bad offensive line, which has been a problem for Darnold. When he doesn't get good protection, he is not fared too well. So a worrisome fit for me, Darnold behind this O-line. Then you also have, the whole JSN plus Cooper Kupp thing, where both these guys have been primary slot receivers through their career so far. So interested to see how they deploy those guys. I think JSN's capable of winning on the outside. I also think he's probably better off in the slot. So I want to see how that all shakes out. So again, just enough questions on JSN for a guy who I don't think has like top 6 wide receiver upside. So I'm just kind of okay fading him, because even if he beats me, I think it's going to be finishing, wide receiver 13, and that's fine.
I think Cooper Kupp's arrival is a positive for Jackson Smith and Jigba, because I think Cooper Kupp and there's a good chance based on recent history that he misses time this season. The fact that Seattle threw a bunch of money at him says that they're like, oh, we're all set at wide receiver 2 because we got Cooper Kupp. And I disagree that they're set. So I think he helps the chances of Jackson Smith and Jigba dominating those targets and getting that volume that just makes him a safe weekly play. But I agree with you. I don't think JSN has that ultimate upside to make me regret passing on him at his ADP. Zach Charbonnet is a guy that I'm totally avoiding if I don't have Kenneth Walker, because he's going at the end of round 9, which seems fair, but he's going just ahead of J.K. Dobbins, Jordan Mason, Tajay Spears. And I highlight those guys because it seems like all 4 of those are pretty similar players. I don't think that they're as similar as the ADPs make them look, though. I think that Zach Charbonnet is going to be worthless fantasy-wise as long as Walker is healthy. Yep. Whereas I think J.K. Dobbins, Jordan Mason, Tajay Spears all have much better chances of taking significant pieces of their team's work shares when the RB1 or the other guy that they're splitting with is healthy. And I don't think any of them suffer on the upside front in the case of an injury to that player versus what Charbonnet offers.
I guess I disagree a little with that last part. I think Charbonnet, we've seen that he is an elite handcuff. We had the 6 games that Kenneth Walker missed last year, and in those games, Charbonnet finished RB8, RB7, RB1, RB17, RB20, and RB39. So he's shown he's an elite handcuff. I think those other guys either haven't, or I don't think they would be as strong. But that said, I'm definitely out on Charbonnet too. I just think RB38 is a tough price for a guy who, I agree with you, Matt, he's not going to have standalone fantasy value. I would rather just wait 3, 4, 5 rounds to get some of these other handcuffs who, again, maybe don't have quite the ceiling, but are still going to be like locked in fantasy starters if the guy ahead of them goes down.
And by the way, while we're back talking about the backfield in Seattle, I wanted to jump back to the Clint Kubiak point, just in case anybody watching or listening is not familiar with, the Kubiak family tree. It starts with Gary Kubiak, Clint Kubiak's dad, who was very strongly intertwined with the Shanahan family, coached under Mike Shanahan, was a head coach with Kyle Shanahan as his OC. Just they combined through the years to put out lots of successful running backs, to prop up running backs who weren't very good otherwise and make them strong fantasy assets. So that, I think, is why even still with Clint, and we'll see how much it is the case with him, but he brings a bit more, reliability, makes you want to bet on the running game until it proves that you shouldn't do so. Cooper Kupp, I mentioned I'm not at all interested in drafting him, and Sam Darnold, Elijah Arroyo, similarly, I'm not looking to get those guys at all in redraft.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've drafted Cup once all year, and I'm up to close to 50 drafts at this point. He's just a guy I just kind of overlook when he's sitting there, even on top of the ADP. Just the numbers say he's declining, and to me, the Rams releasing Cooper Kupp is so damning. Like McVay and Matt Stafford both love this guy, and they just dumped him. That just tells me he's done. So, and again, it's not a passing game I believe in, so I have no interest in Kupp, no interest in Sam Darnold. I have started to mix Arroyo in as a tight end 3 in best ball. I think in lineup setting leagues, he's not worth a pick. Maybe as a waiver wire option as we get into the season. But he was an exciting prospect to me. And then the Seahawks, just since they've drafted him, for starters, they took him 50th overall, so we got good draft capital, and they've just been talking him up. GM John Schneider said that they think Arroyo could play X receiver. He said they thought he was a top 15 talent in the entire class if he didn't have injury issues in college. And then of course they released Noah Fant, kind of clears the way for Arroyo to at least be like the primary pass catching tight end on this team if he's ready. And I mean, again, there's not much to like in the passing game outside of JSN, so there are targets to be had. So as a tight end 3 in best ball, he's still tight end 31 in ADP. I'm definitely taking some shots on him.
Yeah, I certainly have no problem with him in that tight end 3 range for best ball. We'll just have to work on rolling that R with Jared this offseason. Check the show notes for the team preview articles for all these teams. If you want to dive deeper on any of the players that we've talked about, that's a collection of our player profiles. So go into lots of detail about all of these players. You can also see where everybody sits in our fantasy football rankings for whatever format you're playing, or if you have your league synced at draftsharks.com, you can see where they rank in your specific format, and you can run a mock draft to see where we would recommend or not recommend taking every player from all these NFC West teams. Whatever format you're playing, dynasty, redraft, or otherwise, we want Draft Sharks to be your unfair advantage. Hey!